for me, for sure, like I struggled immensely with the idea that I had any kind of privilege. It took me a really long time, an embarrassingly long time, to not just come to terms with my privilege, but to figure out, just like what I could do to make a difference, and try to, help level the playing field and, just help bring about positive change, and also to help like make the conversation easier to have. It was, just let me tell you, it's not easy. So I do my own nails. I've been doing them since well before COVID, I think, for like a few years now. And yeah, I have to fix both of my thumbs because they broke. I need to fix my nails, but I got my dishwasher going and I am actually starving, so guacamole it is. Cilantro, the red onion, Himalayan pink salt, pepper, onion powder, and garlic powder. No, it's not authentic, but it's mine and it's yummy, so I don't care. Oh, and lime juice. You got some chips and dip, Judah? Some chips and guac? The yummy? Can you say guacamole? What is that? Can you say guacamole? Okay.
How much are you paying me to be your cameraman?
Get out of here.
So this is for free?
Yes.
Bye. Just kidding.
Why are you so crazy? Can you tell us that?
Tell us what? I'm not crazy. That is a rational request. You're asking me to do something and I'm not getting paid.
Why do I have to pay you? Why can't
To
we have
film
that
you,
love?
I have other stuff to
And
do.
you should be happy that you have the privilege of filming. Such
I'm
a
about to
beautiful
drop this
woman.
phone in the toilet
You
if you
better
keep
not.
talking
You have to
reckless.
buy me a new one.
I won't have to do nothing. I got a Samsung Galaxy 7 you could use.
Absolutely not.
Okay then.
You see how he treats me, people?
I treat
what I
you
have
with
to
kindness.
Don't be ridiculous.
Are you doing your toenails?
I did my camera
Oh, you did?
Yes. Don't put the camera on my feet.
I thought you did your toenails.
I did.
You lotion them?
I don't know.
Oh,
That's
goodness.
what I
You can't be out here with ashy feet. That's the worst.
That's why I said don't do it. Don't have me out here looking crazy.
Look at the ankle
I
right
already
there.
got this
Look at
scarf
the
on.
ankle.
Are you on my ankle?
I'm about to be.
What is wrong with you?
Like, no, we can't see the ash because you're too light skinned.
Don't talk about me being light skinned.
Well, I gotta go.
Bye. Picks of the day. So Jack bringing up my being light skinned kind of just made me think about the whole issue of colorism and how difficult of a conversation it is to have. I think for me, for sure, like I struggled immensely with the idea that I had any kind of privilege. It took me a really long time, an embarrassingly long time, to not just come to terms with my privilege, but to figure out, just like what I could do to make a difference, and try to, help level the playing field and just help bring about positive change, and also to help like make the conversation easier to have. It was, just let me tell you, it's not easy. And by the way, like, I'm clearly in my car. I am getting some groceries for us to eat this evening. I just want to take a quick second to talk about how I came to terms with my privilege, and I think to give a little bit of insight for the people who are trying to, communicate privilege to anyone who has it, not just in the context of colorism, but just in general, just to kind of like give them a little, if that is you, to give you insight into how to effectively communicate to people who have privilege. Because I think if you're not someone who has privilege, it's kind of like, this is an obvious thing, like, I'm expressing it to you, why isn't it registering? Like, what's so hard to understand about this? But there's a lot, I think, that goes on in the mind of someone who has privilege when they're first confronted with it, and overcoming that, or being able to like think past it to be able to empathize with someone who is disadvantaged because of things that are out of their control, I think can be easier said than done. And I think for me, hearing the subject of privilege just in general articulated a bit differently helped me to come to terms with my own privilege in the context of colorism. So the first thing that I think for me was probably the most difficult to come to terms with was just the reality that my experience growing up kind of existed in a vacuum. I think that one of the more difficult things to kind of receive from someone who's telling you about your privilege is, them saying that your life has been a certain way, or you haven't had to go through certain things or whatever else because you experience privilege. And for me, it was like the things that I was being told are like normal for a light-skinned black woman to deal with. I was just like, yeah, no, I can't relate. I have no idea what you're talking about. None of, like, that's not a thing. Like, you're saying all this stuff and it's not a thing. Like, I remember even reading like an article, and it was in a popular magazine or popular like online forum or something like that at the time. And it was basically saying like, tell your light-skinned daughters that they're more than just pretty, or teach your light-skinned daughters that they're more than just pretty. And I'm like, what? Like, that's like, duh. Like, like I don't understand. Like, who's not teaching their light-skinned daughter that they're more than just pretty? Because in my house, no one made a big deal about my appearance at all. Like, I was always told that I was smart and that I was articulate and that I, could be a lawyer or, any of these, academic career paths or whatever. And so, and I was like, and I'll, try to add in a picture here, but like, I was super nerdy and really skinny. I didn't dress well. And so like, I got bullied, I got teased. I did not have what I have come to learn is like the normal light-skinned girl experience. It just wasn't my life. And so for people who I didn't know that well, who didn't know me that well, to tell me, this is what your life has been like, and they're making these assumptions based on what I look like now. I was just like, yeah, no, that's not a thing. And what I had to come to terms with was that, just because, one, that my experience existed in a vacuum, it wasn't normal. And two, just because something is not real for me or it wasn't my experience doesn't mean that it doesn't happen, and that should not be used as an excuse to invalidate someone else's experience. I think if you are a person who experiences any kind of privilege at all, if you hear things that are a part of the narrative that don't necessarily apply to you, you don't have to let somebody else tell your story, but you also cannot allow the fact that the narrative does not necessarily reflect your story to put you in a position where you feel like this person's experience and the experience of darker-skinned individuals from all ethnic backgrounds is not valid. It's tough to separate, what your experience and your reality has been from what is true for someone else. But I think it's really, really important to be intentional about that. And on the other side of things, if you're someone who is trying to communicate privilege to someone, and they're saying like that, I can't relate, it doesn't, that's not my story. It's frustrating. But I think it's important to just be, kind of mindful that, because, and I'm saying it's important to be mindful, not because it's your responsibility to be mindful. I want to be clear about that. I don't feel like if you are a victim of colorism, or you are someone who is negatively impacted by it, I don't believe that it is your responsibility to communicate differently or to handle your pain and your frustration a specific way. But I do think that if your goal in communicating the issue and your experience is to create change and to help this person who may not grasp the gravity of the problem, if you're trying to help them understand, I think it can be beneficial to just be mindful that the fact that it's not their experience may be clouding their judgment. And so addressing that can be helpful. It can be helpful to explicitly say like, okay, that's fair. It's fair that maybe you have not experienced it. Maybe, this happened. This is my experience with these people over here, but you can't relate to that. That's fine. The fact that you can't relate to it doesn't mean that it doesn't happen. And it doesn't mean that my experience isn't valid. And it doesn't mean that this is not a problem. You are the exception, not the rule. And it's important for you to understand that you are the exception as opposed to the rule. So yeah, I think that it's not your responsibility to make people understand or to cater your communication to these people who don't get it. It's their responsibility to try to understand. But at the same time, I think if you are confronted with someone who is pushing back against this, and you have the tools to be able to address that particular block, I think that it could potentially go a long way to helping that person kind of get out of their own head, to seeing the bigger picture. So the second thing that I had to come to terms with was the fact that I don't know what I don't know. If you're applying for a job, you don't know who the other candidates are. If you're going through an interview process for school or anything like that, you don't know who you're up against. And so while I don't know for sure that there's anyone who, I have no awareness of there being someone who was darker skinned and more deserving and I got chose over them because I'm more palatable or whatever, I don't know that hasn't happened. And so, I can't say that I have not benefited. I can't say with any level of certainty that I haven't benefited from light skin privilege in those kinds of scenarios. I don't know. And the fact that I can't say for sure one way or the other, I think is indicative of the problem. And so just because you don't have like a conscious awareness of discrimination or something like that happening, or you benefiting from, just inequality, it doesn't mean that it doesn't happen, and it doesn't mean that you haven't benefited from it. And so the fact that you're not aware of it is not an excuse to invalidate someone else's experience or to invalidate the existence of the bigger problem. So the third thing I had to come to terms with was the fact that there are things that I probably take for granted, that are, even if it's not a huge advantage, it may be just like a small advantage or something that's affirming for me, that someone else is not getting. And even though, because I'm taking it for granted, it doesn't seem like it's that big of a deal for me, it could be, offensive or hurtful or discouraging to someone who is not receiving the same, or who's not being afforded the same opportunity, or, being given the same level of deference. Example, when I was in college, there was this thing called the market, and it was, just like a little place where you get like snacks and like burgers and fries, that kind of stuff. And so the people who worked behind the counter and like made the food and everything were mostly guys. And so on more than one occasion, I, ordered food or whatever, and would find, like, get my order in like my little bag to find like an extra thing of fries. I got an extra burger a couple of times. And so it was just like a cute little thing. Like, no one ever asked for my number or anything like that. It wasn't, something that like objectively like made my life better or was like super impactful. It wasn't, to me, it wasn't that big of a deal. It was this cute little thing. I got some extra food, who cares? And I didn't necessarily think that like it didn't happen for other people. I was, like, I had an awareness that other girls were kind of being afforded the same, privilege. But I just didn't, one, I didn't think it was that big of a deal, and two, it never really, occurred to me that, people who, like, it never really occurred to me that there were people who, one, it wasn't happening to, and two, who, could maybe even potentially like feel a way about it. And so I forget like why this even came up, but I remember I mentioned it, and my cousin, I think, was like, yeah, like, that never happened to me. I never got any free food from the market. And I was just like, oh. Like, oh, like, that sucks. Like, and for me, it was just kind of like I felt bad. But it was just like, kind of like having that brought to my attention, like, okay, this isn't happening to everyone. And, maybe there's like 1,000 girls on campus. Of course, they can't afford to give every girl on campus free food. And so, of course it's not happening to everyone. And of course, it's a privilege for you to not just receive free food, but to have that kind of affirmation. And, even if it's not, it wasn't necessarily something that was like, to my knowledge, it wasn't something that like was like an obvious thing that happened for me that didn't happen for someone that I was close to or something like that at that time that I was aware of. But imagine, if two girls order food at the same time and only one of them gets an extra thing of fries. Like, how does her friend feel about, how does that make her friend feel? And so for the person who's getting it, like, okay, it's just some fries, like, it's not that big of a deal. But for the person who's being denied the fries, it's like, what does she have that I don't? And just the fact that like anyone has to like ask that question, I think is sad. And if you are someone who, in any given context, you don't have to ask that question, I think that that's a privilege. And it doesn't make you a bad person. It doesn't invalidate the work that you put in or your accomplishments, but it's just, life's not fair. And it's not wrong for people to say, I feel a way about this, and it's not fair, and I'm not happy about it. So yeah, I think it's important to be mindful of the fact that just because I think it's important to be mindful of the fact that there are things that, some of us may take for granted, that can be super hurtful, or damaging for someone who is not being afforded the same privilege, and to be compassionate and empathetic towards that. I think it's, and I've learned this the hard way. I think it's convenient to not be empathetic or to not show compassion, because it's like, it's just this. It's not even that big of a deal. Like, why? Like, who cares? But like, of course you'd think that because, you're not the one being treated as less than. And so I think, I do think it's important to just be empathetic and compassionate. So the last thing the last thing I think that, not even so much that I had to come to terms with, but I heard it and it helped me really put everything into perspective for real. I had always heard of privilege as being, more, or it had always been communicated to me as being some kind of like advantage or head start. I actually was like just listening in on like a conversation about white privilege, and I heard it expressed in a way that was kind of like just eye-opening for me. And they were saying that privilege can be an overt advantage or a head start, but it can also mean that these people over here have to overcome an obstacle that you don't have to overcome. And so when I thought about colorism in that way, because it's like, it's difficult. I think it's difficult as a Black woman, knowing that I move through the world as a Black woman. I am not white passing. And so I've experienced racism. I've experienced bullying and stuff like that. And so for me, it's kind of like, it's difficult for me to think about that as, I think it's difficult for me to conceptualize how that's an advantage. How I am somehow positioned better than someone else. The way it being communicated as an advantage, it's difficult for me to, or it was difficult for me to understand it. I think it's easier now, but at the time, I just didn't see it. And so hearing it in terms of it, the color of my skin not being a barrier to success, the way that dark skin is for other people, was like life-changing. Example, there was one girl in particular who is dark skinned, and we kind of, like I said, I had some really trash takes. They have not aged well. It was bad. And so we kind of like get into it about the whole colorism issue. And she'd be like, you've never been told that you're pretty for a dark skinned girl, and you can't relate, and like, I've had these experiences and you don't understand. And for me, it was just like, girl, like, you have a following on Instagram, you're super pretty, everybody's always telling you how pretty you are, you got way more followers than I do, you have way more people breathing down your neck telling you how amazing you are than I have. And so, like, what do you, like, I don't understand how you're trying to tell me that I'm privileged. I don't understand how you're trying to tell me that I have some kind of advantage that you don't, when you're better situated than I am, as far as I can see from where I'm sitting. And so if someone is telling me, you have an advantage that this person over here doesn't have, but this person is situated better than me, then, like, it's like, I don't understand. That doesn't make sense to me. But if it said that her having dark skin creates a barrier for her that she otherwise would not have to overcome, then I think about it different. Instead of making a direct comparison between the two of us, I can say, oh wow, she's got 20-something thousand followers on Instagram. Imagine how many more she would have if she was light-skinned. And so then it stops being about, like, me and my experience and what I, do or do not have, and more about the fact that people who do not have the same skin color as me have an exponentially more difficult path to getting to where they want to go. It doesn't mean that I, don't have my own hurdles to overcome. It doesn't mean that there are not people in the world who are, situated better than me, who have head starts and access to opportunities that I don't have access to. It doesn't mean that these things are not true, but it means that in this particular context, it's a hurdle that I don't have to overcome. And it's not fair. And the other thing that I think it's important to be mindful of is just that little things can be extremely impactful. I found that speaking up against colorism or colorist just speaking up against colorist rhetoric, standing up for, people who are being talked down on, not just because of the color of their skin, but because of their features or the texture of their hair, just speaking up. And I think me looking the way that I do, me being someone who looks like me, speaking up, I think is important. Because even if it's not super impactful for the person who, I'm trying to educate or whatever else. I think I've realized that for the people who are being talked down on, just to see someone who looks like me saying the things that they really shouldn't have to say for themselves. Like they've been talking about it forever. It's been years of just on and on saying the same things over and over and over again, trying to defend themselves, trying to explain why the things that they experience are not okay. I think it's nice because I like it when I see people say things, or stand up for women, or stand up for just the little guy, the misfits, the underdog. It feels good to not have to come in and have to fight your own battles all the time. It's nice for someone else to come in and say, hey, you know what, like, this isn't okay, and here's why, and to say the things that you really shouldn't have to say for yourself anymore. And I think it's time. I think it's time for people who are in positions of privilege across the board to not continue to take advantage of that, and to be willing to do what they can to help just level out the playing field, and to the extent that they can, make up for the damage that's already been done. So yeah, I definitely think colorism is an issue. I think that privilege in general is an issue. It's not fair, and I think that if you are someone who benefits from privilege, any kind of privilege, you have to be intentional about just dealing with your biases and checking yourself and being self-aware. And I think if you are someone who is not privileged, you're disadvantaged, and you're trying to communicate about those disadvantages to people who are privileged, I think just kind of like keeping in mind what barriers may be there and what their biases are, and speaking to those things. And again, this isn't your responsibility, but I do think that if you have someone who means well, and they for whatever reason, this is just a blind spot or something like that, like they usually mean well or whatever, I think that those people are worth the effort to try to communicate to in a way that they can understand. I think for me, that's something that, again, it's easier said than done. I struggle with, and everyone's not worth the effort, in my opinion. I think there are people who are ignorant, who want to be ignorant and stay ignorant, and so nothing you say is going to matter. And those people get all the condescension that I have to offer. But for people who I feel like, they mean well, and they are trying to understand to the best of their ability, and maybe certain things just haven't been articulated to them in the most effective way. If I feel like I can, maybe give perspective or add value that they previously have not had access to, then I feel like it's worth it. I think compassion and empathy goes a long way, no matter who you are. And so I just, I know that it's hurtful, it's a hard conversation to have, but I would just encourage you, to the extent that you can and you feel like it's worth it, to try to communicate what your experience has been and what changes you think need to take place, from a place of compassion and love and empathy, because I think it worked for me. I was, like I said, I didn't get it, but being able to have just conversations where people weren't jumping down my throat, were genuinely trying to help me understand, even though my guard was up, and I was speaking from my own pain. I was speaking from my own place of pain and trauma, and my own bad experiences, and I don't know that I would have the understanding that I have now if people were not willing to have these tough conversations and be patient with me, and keep trying to communicate it in a way where I can understand. And you know, I'm thankful for that, because I feel like now I have a much better understanding, and I feel like I can be much more effective in terms of being helpful in the pursuit of creating change. And so to the extent that it's worth it, you know, maybe try. But again, it's an issue, and the responsibility for fixing this particular issue is on the people who are perpetuating it. And so if you are someone who is perpetuating colorism or enabling systems of disenfranchisement and marginalization, that's not good. And we're coming for you. So be ready for that. But yeah, that is, I've been talking a long time. That's all I have time for today. I need to go grocery shop. But yeah, I am leaving for Big Bear in a couple of days with my friend Mai, and we are going to be vlogging the trip and talking about friendships and how we have developed a best girl friendship as adults. Like, we're in our 30s and we're making girlfriends. Let me tell you, this is crazy. So all the girls who like, I don't have girlfriends, I don't mess with girls like that, like, I get you. We're here. We got some tips and tricks for you on that. We're also gonna be talking about relationships, and so, and like romantic relationships and stuff like that, and just, you know, showing how girls trip and how this mama just is being intentional about self-care and having some me time and some girl time. I don't have to be up under my family all the time, and I'm not gonna feel bad about it. I'm gonna enjoy my time. So we're gonna talk about that. I'm gonna let y'all see that soon. So yeah, love y'all.